stay with me. Killers on the payroll. Yo, bitch, fuck with me. She do what I say. Fresh from ATM.
Salute, everybody. We rocking out. Make sure y'all dropping y'all likes on the way in. You already know the vibes. You already know the vibes. It's a lot going on. It's a lot going on, but we got some paperwork to read. Salute to everybody on the way in. You already know I'm right here with y'all. I just felt that I'm going to bring it up big on the screen for y'all like this so we could just get through a little bit of this read and break this all down, right? Salute to that. All right, let me just move this microphone, right? Pause. All right, cool. Yeah. I just want to break down this quick read real quick. We got about, what, 25 or 26 pages to read real quick. Yeah, and like I said, salute to everybody on the way in. Hopefully everybody had a blessed day today. Hopefully y'all all in good spirits. You know what I'm saying? But we just going to get right to the read. That's why I say everybody like the video, share it, whatever you want to do, because I'm going to be reading. I'm not going to be telling y'all to do it all the time. So if you can, salute to that. All right? Cool. So we have the brief in support of detention for defendant Eugene Henley. We see his names here, all of the nicknames. This is the only one that we know we really familiar with, because this is the one that Wack was calling him. Drowse. That's the blue button that I just pressed. The button's blue. Yeah. So look. So we understand that. You see Hannibal Muhammad, anybody Clipper, and Dave Austin. You cannot call Big U any of them names when he in the building. Allegedly, they calling him Big Yusuf. Big Yusuf. That's what I heard, allegedly. So plaintiff United States of America by and through its counsel of record, the United States Attorney for the Central District of California and Assistant United States Attorney Kevin J. Butler and Gina A. McCabe hereby files its brief in support of detention of defendant Eugene Henley Jr., also known as AKA. This brief is based upon the attached memorandum of points and authorities, the files and records in this case, and such further evidence and argument as the court may permit. Then he dated. See, it was dated yesterday. Slow. All right, cool. Go through the table of contents. Okay, table of authorities. It's going to go stating some cases and stuff that they're going to be comparison to. Okay, cool. Cool. Memoranda and point and authorities. All right. Salute to everybody on the way in. All right. So it says, for decades, introductions. For decades, defendant Eugene Henley Jr., also known as Big U, defendant has put on a public facade masquerading as a reformed gang member and legitimate businessman whose only ambition was to better his community. But defendant wasn't helping Crenshaw. He was helping himself. In the shadows, defendant was secretly operating as a kingpin of a criminal enterprise that has ruled Los Angeles through violence, fear, and intimidation. Now he seeks pretrial release under the guise of his reformed persona, even though his criminal activities have included extortion, robbery, and wire fraud, bank fraud, and human trafficking. The court should see through defendant's farce and keep him in custody for the safety of the community. Everybody hit the poll in the chat. Do you think Big U is going to beat this case to spring out of the case? You know what I mean? Anybody could beat the case, man. All right. To avoid custody, defendants will no doubt continue his double dealing as he did to celebrities and donors that he duped into believing they were helping young underprivileged athletes chase their dreams, when in reality they were unwittingly lining the defendant's pockets as he embezzled donation after donation. Even in short time, damn, this is crazy how they make it. Even in a short time custody, he is up to his old tricks, once again trying to use some of those same celebrities for his personal gain. He has even suggested that he can manipulate the president of the United States into intervening in the case and dropping the charges, even as he simultaneously, what the hell, when did he say that? Refers to the president as the orange man while in custody. Nasty work, bro. This court, you don't know, they got spies and everybody all around you. You can't talk to nobody in that building, bro. It's nasty in there, bro. Who you think? Where they getting this information from, bro? They talking about he's saying this in custody. Where you think they getting this from, bro? These niggas is rat bastards everywhere you look. This court should not be fooled by good deeds defendant's promises to accomplish if only he could close the detention doors behind him. The truth is that he will undoubtedly cause exponential harm to the case, to the community, and to the others if he were released. Defendant should remain detained for the safety of the community, the victims, and the witnesses in the case. In the defendant's own words, if I would have had a problem with any man, the issue would have been resolved and he wouldn't be here, or I wouldn't be here. And for the hope of some semblance of justice for the families of his victims, indeed, with seemingly just hours of notice of his impending arrest, defendant has already destroyed the valuable evidence, attempting to paint a false narrative of his criminality in the public and publicly condemned his enemies by name. This is when he was in the car naming off like Wack 100 and all. Like, he didn't tell us not to deal with Wack, but they're saying like, nope, he's saying he told everybody not to listen to his co-defendants. He never told us that. He said he's not dealing with his co-defendants. He never told us that. Let's be real. He cannot be allowed to continue on his obstructive path. Any supporters defendant may offer as sureties will not protect the community. They did not save RW, whom defendant emmed and abandoned in the desert. They did not save the defendant's countless extortion and embezzlement victims, whom the defendant terrorized or tricked for years. They did not stop the defendant from leaving Los Angeles in the midnight hours before his arrest, or hurling thinly veiled threats in the lead up to his surrender. This court should have no trouble finding that defendant represents a danger and a risk of non-appearance and non-compliance with court orders that cannot be adequately mitigated through release conditions. With the utmost respect to pretrial services, pretrial supervision is not enough. For the sake of the community, defendant Henley should remain in custody. Now, statements of facts. The defendant is a dedicated rolling 60s and leader of his own violent racketeering enterprise. Defendant is an avowed and famed member of the Rolling 60s neighborhood Crip street gang. As early as 1992, the Los Angeles Times described defendant as the leader of that gang, and little has changed as the defendant has aged. As he states in many interviews, when asked about any gang tattoos, it ain't on you, it's in you. Indeed, defendant's gang ties run deep in his blood. The defendant has loudly recounted the terror he instilled for years. In various interviews, the defendant recounts selling narcotics, taking a percentage of all illegal activities in the neighborhood, leading the body snatchers kidnapping crew, and eventually going to prison, where he immediately claims to have paid off the guards and taken percentage of a drug sales. Now, after an investigation spanning more than 4 years, defendant was charged with running the Big U enterprise from at least 2010 until his arrest, which often used the Rolling 60s as the muscle in its criminal activities. Specifically, the defendant, often assisted by Rolling 60s or other members and associates of the Big U enterprise, used intimidation, fear, violence, threats of violence, assaults, extortion, and M's in the streets for power and profit through the media and his nonprofit Developing Options. Defendant portrayed himself as the neighborhood savior in drawing in donations and the government's resources intended to benefit at-risk youth, but which he oftentimes used to fund his lifestyle instead. Despite his life of crime, defendant never wanted to return to jail, so he went to great lengths to avoid the law enforcement detection, tampering with witnesses, and otherwise obstruct justice. Crazy. Everybody drop a like. You already know in the building. Salute to everybody. Let me get a drink of a little water. Everybody drop a like. We just doing a read. The unaliving of RW. In 2021, the defendant drove to Las Vegas with another Enterprise member to confront RW, a rapper signed to defendant's record label who was also a close friend of the defendant's son and someone defendant had known for years. Apparently upset about RW's lack of studio production and purported diss song, defendant left the studio with RW in the middle of the night for RW's Airbnb. RW leaving his Airbnb with his belongings was the last time he was seen alive, as he was found the next morning with gunshot wounds to his head. Defendant returned to the studio hours after he had left, claiming that he had gone to the gym despite the 2 a.m. hour. Wow, that's crazy. Defendant's cell phone activities, the obstructionist conduct of the members of the Enterprise and the defendant's own words and reactions intercepted on the wire prove his guilt of the heinous crime. RW's unaliving not only demands the defendant continue detention, but cautions against what may happen to other witnesses, cooperators, and victims were the defendant to be released on bonds. Now they got the robbery and extortions. And I've been breaking down a few of these things on my channel, the Hobbs Act robberies and how they charging. I showed you one guy got 2 attempted, and they said you're going to get 252 months just for the 2 attempted Hobbs. And these people don't got attempted Hobbs. They have actual Hobbs extortion and actual Hobbs robbery. So that's going to be big, son. You can get 20 years for this shit. It's crazy. Throughout the period of the interception and before, the defendant was captured on audio and video recordings extorting victim 1, both through a co-defendant, Sylvester Robinson Ovey, and personally. In doing so, defendant and Robinson frequently threatened violence against victim 1, Dale Morrison, if he failed to pay their fees, which he was paying up to $25,000 in his highest paying. Those threats were not empty when victim 1 started to ignore defendant's calls demanding extortion payments. Defendant sent multiple armed robbers to victim 1's dispensary to rob him, and then demanded $10,000 from victim 1 to prevent future robberies. In multiple intercepted calls, defendant and his co-conspirators discussed even more robberies they were committing. Robinson also frequently told victim 1 about defendant's violence. Sylvester Robinson used to tell Dale Morrison about him. Like, yo, son, listen, man, when you're around Big U, you got to keep a blower. Listen, son, yo, you got to pay this nigga. Yo, listen, he going to stomp a hole in your shit, son. Yo, listen, bro. Listen, man, you don't know that? He the only one that's out here still catching bodies, bro. All the other people from back in them times, like here, they done retired, bro. He's the only one that ain't retired. This is some of the things that they're saying that Robinson was talking to victim 1 about. Even Big U was talking to victim 1 as well, because he's the one that told victim 1 that he ran down on Wack 100 in the alley with all of that. You know what I mean? So Wack 100, you remember that day, right? That's the blue button, the Yusufa button. Yeah, when you see Big U, yeah, call that nigga Yusufa. All right, so boom. So in the multiple intercepted calls, prevent the future robberies. In multiple intercepted calls, defendant and his co-conspirators discussed even more robberies they were committing. Robinson also frequently told victim 1 about defendant's violence, including that defendant was the only, see what I told you? The only OG still actively committing schmers. You heard? So he said, schmirkios. Free my nigga Durkee out the thing too. Yo, in addition to the constant extortion of victim 1, defendants extorted victim 2 for $30,000 for a party thrown in defendant's honor in December 2021. When the victims requested to pay only $20,000, the defendant responded with force, threatening that I'll tear this bitch up and it won't be a club there no more. And that and then sending Robinson, another co-defendant, Mark Mitten, right, and members of the Rolling 60s to confront victim 2 at his business and extort the $30,000 from him. They even said that, yo, listen, I'll send 5,000 Crips over here, nigga. I have 5,000 Rolling 60s tear this place up. That's exactly what he said if you want to go off the paperwork. Exactly. He said they're going to have 5,000 people run down on that nigga shit. Straight. That's scary. Right? Blue button. Blue button, nigga. That button's a blue, nigga. Straight. It's the use of a button, nigga. Straight. Anyway, hit the poll and y'all drop a like. Listen. While the substantive extortion counts are currently limited to just some of those extortions of victim 1 and victim 2, they are not defendants' only extortions. For example, on October 19, 2021, defendant told victim 1 that the defendant was taking over the extortion of another business owner. Then on November 7, 2022, on an intercepted call, after yet another extortion, victim stated that defendant had not fully paid the extortion victim for work on defendant's vehicle. Defendant directed Martin, is that Bickler? to call the extortion victim right now and stated that he would go out there and clip that nigga. On February 14th, it's crazy. On February 14th, 2023, that's Valentine's Day. He about to take your money on Valentine's Day. This nigga allegedly, Big U, chill, you got to crack a joke in there. That's your button, Big U. That shit blue. Oh, neighborhood cousins. Look, it said on an intercepted call, Robinson told defendant that Robinson told Jew Boy that he owed the Big U Enterprises money and that they will allow a payment plan, but if he did not pay, they were going to shut this mother effer down. So now the power to direct violence. Making him that much more dangerous, defendant holds power over others threatening and committing violence. For example, on November 23rd, 2022, this is 2 days after he shook down Bricc Baby, because I think he shook him down on 21, 2020, whatever. So on an intercepted call, defendant said that he can pay 3 people $50 each to beat someone up and described paying people to mess up a store that was refusing to provide the defendant when on a discount. On April 17, 2023, on another intercepted call, defendant just directed an individual to deliver a message to another marijuana dispensary owner that defendant said F him and that he effed with the wrong guy. Now, despite a prior 23-year sentence for armed robbery, the defendant stayed armed. That's crazy when they warn you. When they word this shit like that, bro, it's nasty, bro. It's nasty, bro. Listen, everybody drop a like. This is craziness. They said since at least July 20 of 1992, defendant has been prohibited from even possessing firearms based on his felony convictions for second-degree robbery with a firearm conspiracy and drug trafficking, for which he received a 23-year sentence upon his release from prison. He nevertheless continued to use firearms himself, like when he unalived. Jesus Christ. They said like when he unalived. They're just saying that he did it. You know you're supposed to be innocent to prove guilty. This is crazy. They said like when he unalived RW. What the hell? They really have everything to say that he did this? Because the way they're writing this, you know, sometimes they'll write like they speculate this. They're saying like he did this. And directed others to use firearms like when they robbed victim one dispensary. This is what I'm telling you. I'm telling you, son. If Luce Cannon think he probably got that 1 or 2 charges, they probably put a 924 on that nigga too, son. Anybody else a part of that robbery in the dispensary could get a 924 seat along with it. That's 84 months basically just regular. And not no extra shit. They could throw more time on that. It's 84 months on top of the Hobbs Act robbery and the Hobbs Act extortions, bro. I told you. 2 attempted extortions. One guy, they was giving them 252 months. One guy had 1 Hobbs Act robbery. They's like, you know what? You're supposed to get 51 months, but we're going to give you an upward variance. And they told the judge to give him an upward variance and gave that nigga 120 months, bro.
Oh, no, you can't be serious. That is some bullshit
You hear me?
right there.
They gave that nigga 120 months, man. He was supposed to get 51 months, this nigga, for Hobbs robbery. They're not playing with Hobbs. It's like you committed an M, bro. You get charged with a real harboring felony, a 924, just a 924 C. Get a 924J charge. The minimum and the mandatory for the for the charge is 10 years. Just the minimum and the mandatory. 10 years for the 924J, not the C. So boom. And then you already know you're guilty of what your co-conspirators do. Whatever your co-conspirators are doing, you're guilty of what they're doing. So if me and you roll up in a spot, you got the weapon, I got the weapon, and you go take all the money from them people, and you stand right here and just make sure nobody move. But I'm gonna have the straps on everybody. I have the strap. That don't mean when we get charged, I'm the only one that gets charged with the strap. We all could get charged with possession of this weapon because we all use this weapon in furtherance of our crime, and intentionally and knowingly and willingly, we all did the crime. Do you understand that? This is not like a regular state robbery and no dumb shit. This is federal conspiracy robbery. Okay? Federal conspiracy extortion. Okay, where he received a 23-year sentence upon his relief. Nevertheless, he continued to use firearms himself, like when he unalived RW, and used firearms when they robbed victims one dispensary through this investigation. So, and Luce Cannon could probably have like 4 charges: the robbery, the extortion, and probably a weapon possession. Recording corroborated that defendant consistently was armed. Damn. On October 22, 2022, Robinson told the victim one that the defendant and Robinson would be attending an after party. At the party, the victim one was promoting and that a pat down is out because the defendant would be in attendance, implying that the defendant was armed. So like, don't pat him down because he's gonna have his shit on him. It's crazy. On an intercepted call on at least a month later, defendant told an incarcerated individual that anyone coming at him better come correct. He told told the nigga in jail this on the line, hot. Jesus Christ, Big, you talked yourself into this shit too. You can't blame Luce Cannon and everybody for that. Even though Luce Cannon, them niggas was talking on him, and they dealing him a bad one. Wack, Luce, and 600, aka 1200, all three of them niggas. So we ain't gonna lie on that. But Big U was doing a lot of talking himself, bro. And it's just like he really talked himself into his own shit. Luce Cannon was throwing stones like out the glass house, and his shits hit Big U window and cracked it. But it bounced off his shit and cracked his own window. Because he's now in jail for the same shit that he was saying about Big U. That's why it's crazy. They say don't throw stones when you're living in a glass house. Right? So boom. So the defendant incarcerated. That's crazy. He told an incarcerated individual that anyone come at him better come correct because the defendant always has two blowers, homie. AKA fire magnetos on him. He says on January 3rd, on January 3rd, 2023, on an intercepted call, defendant described to an incarcerated individual tooling up with magnetos to travel to a Crips neighborhood because we are the most arrogant, bougie, self-righteous mother effers on the planet Earth. On April 1st, 2023, on another intercepted call, defendant asked someone to grab the defendant's blower, which he left on the ground. Yeah, I remember that. He left it on the ground. Someone said he told somebody to go back for it in a blue shirt, and it was at the front by a car tire. Yeah, they said that he did this. This is crazy. Defendant's crime against victims are not, let me see, defendant is not only a physical danger, but a financial danger too. Defendant's crimes against victims are not confined only to violence. He spent decades creating a facade of a reformed gang member who seeks to build rather than to destroy his community. So disguised, the defendant used that persona primarily to take from the very community that he claims to help. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowed from the charitable donors and government program to the defendant's developing options bank account. Almost immediately, he siphoned off much of the money into his personal bank accounts. The defendant got richer and richer off his fraud, like his extortions and robberies, owning multiple homes, driving Mercedes, taking lavish trips, and shopping for luxuries like a $30,000 necklace. And the money taken from the donors and taxpayers' pockets will never find their intended benefactors at the at-risk youth and the children of Crenshaw. That damage cannot be undone. But the defendant's success in deceiving politicians, celebrities, and community activists, as well as the public at large, further militates that against his release back into the community as he attempts to fund inexpensive defense. The defendant is fluent in obstruction. All of it may be founded on crimes, but the defendant has built charmed life following his 23-year sentence for armed robbery. He does not want to give it up and uses obstruction frequently to avoid that. The destruction of surveillance footage, use of encrypted applications like FaceTime, demands to meet in person to avoid law enforcement intercepting communications, use of multiple phones and cars, orders not to speak to law enforcement, and chastising any perceived or suspected cooperators are detailed in the charging instruments. A few are also highlighted here. Even when the criminal charges were not against the defendants personally, the defendants instructed a victim that the victim was to go to the lineup. Okay, this is what they want them to go pick up next person. Okay, the victim was to go to the lineup and tell him to pick the wrong person to insulate the defendant's associate from being charged or getting charges. A master manipulator, the defendant told another associate that to influence the media for his lawsuit against the law enforcement, he should show both positive and negative parts of his life, wear glasses, and say that he was working with developing options, even though he was not. That's nasty. You just looking like you scheming and you telling the nigga put on glasses and all that. That shit's crazy. How they making you seem, regardless if you was probably just doing it for whatever, don't matter. When these people's building a case, sorry, bro, this is just how it's going to be. On multiple intercepted call, the defendant talked about beating up or at least breaking a witness's jaw. Facts. He talked about broken a few people's jaws, even a Jew boy. And while the defendant may claim other reasons for feuding with that witness, this court should protect him. Even after fleeing with his phones in the hours before his scheduled arrest in this case in an attempt to intimidate and dissuade anyone. Look at this. did he really intimidate and attempt anybody to do that in that video? That nigga looked sad in that video. That nigga looked like he just wanted to say something about Wack 100 and Luce and all these niggas before he turned himself in. That's what it looked like Big U wanted to. You know what I mean? Like, keep it real, son. If you was about to turn yourself in, Big U does not know if he's going to see ground and grass again, bro. So if you about to turn yourself in, you might say something too, even though it might come back to hurt you. But I don't think he was saying it like to say don't deal with him. You know what I mean? He was talking about his own self. But look how they wrote him in there. They said, nah, nigga, this is obstructing. I think they gave Big U another another charge with this. I think an obstruction charge, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to put no extra charges on the brother. But if I'm not mistaken, I think they try to throw like an obstruction charge on him. Dissuade anyone from cooperating with law enforcement or otherwise reporting information about defendants. And the defendant posted publicly on Instagram, naming his co-defendants and known opponents, instructing the fraud advocate presidents, and the public not to associate with them, and claiming that if they did, they were not black. Wow. Did he say it like that, son? We got to go back to the Big U call, son. We got to go back to it, son. He's probably saying some things around this, but Big U's not saying this, bro. Come on, bro. He cannot say this, bro. Jesus Christ, bro. Jesus Christ. But he said something like this, but I don't think he said this exactly, bro. They're just making him seem like that because he's a powerful figure, bro. It's real shit, bro. You think it's powerful? He's black and powerful. In an attempt to poison the jury pool, the defendant posted on Instagram claiming racial profiling. He did do that, which is a little too much. Ignoring that almost every single one of the defendant's victim, from RW to the many of his extortion, robbery, and fraud victims, and the at-risk youth he was supposed to help, are all black, and blaming his co-defendants and opponents for the charges filed against him in the federal and criminal complaint. Now, the legal standard, it says a defendant must be detained pending trial where no condition of combination of conditions will reasonably assure the appearance of the person as the required and safety of any other persons and the community. 18 USC. They go about stating the cases. Then they go into the Bill Reform Act. Mandates that individualized evaluations guided by the factors articulated in the 3142, the United States versus Diaz-Hernandez. They give you a case file. The nature and the seriousness of the offense charged, including whether the offense is a crime of violence, the weight of the evidence against the defendant's character, physical and mental condition, family and community ties, past conduct, history relating to drug or alcohol abuse, and criminal history, and the nature of and seriousness of the danger to any person or to the community that would be posed by the defendant's release. Right? Okay, so that they just give you another case file, right? So it says defendant should remain detained because he is a risk of non-appearance and a danger to the community. The 43 federal charges, 43, bro, against the defendant, the damaging evidence against him, his dangerous history and characteristics, and the risk to numerous specific individuals and the community at large if he were to be released, all support his detention pending trial. Now, the nature and circumstances of the offenses. The nature and circumstances of the defendant's offenses unequivocally weigh in favor of his detention. There is no crime more serious or permanent than that of an unaliving that the defendant committed, and still the defendant did not stop there. Like, how they got him like that? First of all, listen to me, bro. Yes, he went to the studio. Yes, he pulled away the camera work. Yes, he told his wife and everybody don't talk to the police. Yes, he told his son don't talk to the police. Yes, he turned his jacks off at the time, but they're talking like they got somebody specifically that said, yo, this man, he did this shit straight. That's how these people is talking. Like somebody told them straight, son, because they said they cannot pinpoint exactly what he did when his phone was off. And then at an hour or so later, his phone went back on service, pinging again. And then he went back to the studio wherever he was at. And then people was asking him like, why he was sweating. And he said he was at the gym, even though it was 2 a.m. You see what I'm saying? So that means it's a still part of it. They don't know where he was. You see what I'm saying? But yet they're saying that he did this straight, unequivocally. Unequivocally, bro. Straight, bro. They saying that the nigga did that. You see what I'm saying? So, like, do they have somebody saying that and telling them, like, yo, bro, he did this? That's why when we get into the case, you're going to know exactly how they know that. because they never filled it in for us now. We just could speculate. They're going to tell us exactly why they know it and why they keep writing it so positively in it and not in a question format. And that's crazy because every time they talk about this RW, they say he did it, bro. They don't say, yo, what he assumed to do. No, they say you did it, bro. It's crazy. And they're not charging you with the unaliving. They still could bring it down and charge you with it later, but they're not charging them with the unaliving. But they keep saying, you did it, you did it, you did it, bro. Not allegedly I did it, or I could have aspired to do it. No, they saying you did it, you did it, you did it, bro. You see what I'm saying? But they're not charging with the thing. It's nasty. All right, serious, permanent, and the unaliving that the defendant committed, and still and the defendant did not stop there. The court's considerations for cases like defendants have unanimously ruled in the favor of detention. Then they go into another case where that happened. And they said the total commitment to a life of crime. This person was totally committed. And defendant's threats to clip. You know what I'm saying? Devotion to the mafia. Damn, son. Finding in his association with the organized crime and devotion to the mafia. He likened the 60s to the mafia. They got the one picture when he dressed like a mafia type style. These niggas is crazy. A highly relevant consideration to detention. The Torah court detained the defendant who made the mafia his highest priority in life and pledged fealty to its needs, whatever, and its circumstances. This person was in mafia. Okay, they're just talking about this next person, so we ain't really got to read about him. But they're just talking about this person went up for the Bail Reform Act, but might plausibly be subjected to pretrial detention on the grounds of his dangerousness and his commitment to the life of crime that he is. They're like, you ain't changing life, so we might as well just keep you in jail pending trial. So including the conspiracy to commit attempted M and conspiracy to commit assault with the background of an enterprise engaged in other acts of violence, the district court reversed, noting that the defendant is charged with violent and serious crimes and allegedly has been a member of this street gang since May 2012, and that the seriousness of the violence, natures of the crime the defendant is charged with weighs against his release. And they go into another case. Boom, where's Captain? Okay, so where a defendant was charged with a RICO indictment based on extortion, wire fraud, witness tampering. This is what I'm saying. So when I go through breaking down other cases or comparing to Luce, like when I went and brought up the 4 cases with Hobbs Acts, robberies and shit, and extortions, I'm not going to guess out my head. I'm going to go find 4, 5, 10 cases where everybody got charged with Hobbs Acts, everybody got charged with the robbery of the Hobbs, and do case-by-case comparison. Because this is all court is. If you're charged with a crime and they don't know how to rule in a thing, they'll go cite from an old case and compare and contrast to your case. And this is what they do. You know what I mean? So this is what they do. We don't have to go in our own brain. We don't have to just think. We just go to an old RICO case, federal case, or whatever the case, and make the comparisons, and then we're going to do it. So look, so they go and find a case that's similar to this. Where's RICO, where's extortion, where's wire fraud, where's witness tampering, where they saying that he's tampering with witness, and other crimes, and directed the activities of his co-defendant. So they also saying this person was in a boss position. This person was directing his co-defendants as well, as the defendants did here. So the detention was warranted based on the activities as well as the activities of those he supervised and he controlled. Then they go into this case, bang, 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 right? Also citing multiple Second Circuit court cases have rejected as insufficient various conditions of release proposed in cases involving the pretrial detention of purported leaders of organized crime families shown to be involved in violent criminal activities, also shown in Colombo, bro. Colombo. You know who that is, bro. Colombo, bro. It's crazy. Anyway, reversing the release order even where the defendant did not directly participate in any crime alleged, but led the criminal. So this is the boss, remember? But led, so he wasn't in any crime with all them people. Remember, he's old at one point. But look, he was the leader, though. You know what I'm saying? He led the criminal enterprise that carried out all the criminal activities at his direction anyway, right? So the defendant facing RICO charges based on his own predicate acts of M, unalive, and conspiracy to unalive and other crimes were also detained on danger for readily furthering organized crimes, criminal objectives through violence, which appropriately describes the defendant here. So they also comparing him to a mob boss, which is wild. Yo, comparing him to Colombo, bro. What are you talking about? Genovese and them niggas? Chill, bro. Chill, bro. You know, I shot the movie. He said, you're gone too far, Bix. You're gone too far. You're gone too far, nigga. Y'all niggas comparing this to mobsters. It's crazy. Moreover, as currently charged, the defendant faces a statutory maximum of well over 600 years, bro.
Oh no, you can't be serious. That is some bullshit right there.
That's some bullshit. Even discounting the defendant's criminal history due to its age, as currently charged, the defendant faces a likely guideline ranges of life in prison based on a total of offenses, level of 43 for count one alone. For count one alone. The severity of the potential penalties involved augments defendant's risk of non-appearance. Then they're going to go into another case, Brenneman. Affirming the denial of bail based on the risk of non-appearance, where the defendant faces fraud charges that exposed him to a range of just 57 to 71 months imprisonment. Then they go into United States versus Townsend, explaining that facing the much graver penalties possible under the present indictment, the defendants have an even greater incentive to consider flight, and noting that the electronic monitoring can't assure prevention of non-appearance. They keep stressing that. It is entirely reasonable to conclude that a risk of flight is more likely in a circumstance where the evidence indicates that the defendant has engaged in terrorist activities and facing a substantial risk of being convicted of serious pending charges and receiving significant punishment. While the defendant turned himself in after a period of flight and removal of evidence, he did not at that time know the weight of the charges, the substantial sentence he faces, and the insurmountable evidence of the evidence proving his crimes. See the United States versus this guy, Marscatolo. The steeper the potential sentence, the more probable the flight risk is, especially considering the strong case of the government quotations omitted. In sum, the nature of circumstances of the defendant's offenses demonstrate that he is a risk of both danger and non-appearance. Now, the weight of the evidence. Now, the evidence and that the defendant committed the charged offenses is overwhelming and cannot be ignored in assessing the defendant's risk of danger and the non-appearance in this case. They're going to give us another case. Okay. And given the nature of the crime and the strength of the government's case, we find that the government has met its burden of showing by clear and convincing evidence that no condition or combination of conditions will reasonably assure the safety of the community, and emphasis is added. So now remember, they got these point twos and these little subtexts, so we're going to see what the subtext say just in case, so we make sure we ain't. This is a lot of subtext right here. Hold up. Let me see. Noting in the text endorses assigning relative weights to the statutory factors. Okay, cool. They're just breaking down the little cases inside there. Applying factor-specific cases on forgery. You see, statute does not instruct on one or another factors as less important. It is difficult to see how the factor could always be less. Okay. Damn. Okay. That's just subtext. Right. So the defendant was captured of audio recordings and intercepted wire calls discussing various violent and other crimes for months and for even years. Many of his extortions were themselves captured in recordings. The financial records and tax documents do not lie either. They show exactly how the defendant committed all of his fraud, and that the recordings show why. All of the evidence in this case conclusively shows the defendant's personal involvement in the unalive extortion, robbery, and fraud, human trafficking, and tax crime. The defendant's entire purpose was based on a financial gain, respect, fear, and intimidation. Accordingly, the weight of the evidence in the favors defendant's continued detention, history, and characteristics of the defendant. Now, this court should not fall victim to any argument about the defendant's lack of conviction since his release from state custody in the early 2000s. Absence of the convictions is not the same as absence of crimes. Now, the defendant's history and characteristics plainly flavor detention. Detaining, they're going to a case, detaining this defendant who had no criminal history actually, and was only charged with possession of a weapon while being in a recreational user of marijuana because of his role as a president of a motorcycle club, rewarding violence and stymieing the law enforcement's efforts. Now, the defendant's involvement in multiple violent offenses while holding himself out to be a gang interventionist working with the law enforcement render him particularly dangerous to the community. The fact that Barone, this is the case State versus Barone, the fact that Barone committed and planned violent crimes, even when purportedly cooperating with the authorities while he was planning while cooperating, it's just nasty work with this guy Barone, signals a degree of dangerousness unlikely to be deterred by bail release conditions. Then they go into Lomax, affirming the district court's explanation that the defendant's Hobbs Act's robberies, crimes were a danger to the community. In affirming his sentence, his violent grip over Los Angeles is exacerbated by his apparent continued access to firearms despite being a felon, repeatedly discussed on intercepted calls. Ordering the detention because, among other reasons, evidence of substance abuse and magnetos registered in the defendant's name also shows that the defendant poses a danger to the community. Ordering detention where the defendant's possessions of a loaded magneto and drug represented a danger to that community. And ordering the detention for this guy where the defendant fought and ran from arresting officers but later admitted that he possessed methamphetamines and ammunition, which suggests that the defendant poses a danger to the community, which weighs in his favor of detention. The defendant's depraved and duplicitous schemes to intimidate and defraud the very community that he benefited from, claiming to help cast his criminal history in an even more troubling light. Indeed, defendant's history of charges for unalivened and other gang-related activities compared with the unalivened and the other violent crimes he is now charged with committing alongside gang members suggests that the defendant did not change his criminal behavior in any way. He just got better at hiding it. More recent arrests for child abuse and being a felon in possession of magnetos, firearm, also become a more ominous in light of the evidence in this case. Now, the court should pause in considering whether the defendant is able or willing to conduct himself without putting others in danger. Now that the defendant so clearly fled from law enforcement, the defendant so clearly fled from law enforcement the night before his arrest, only to be publicly blame others for his crimes and charges, reinforces his guilt and his incompatibility with the pretrial release. They go into another case. The flight immediately after the commissions of a crime or immediately before trial supports the inference of consciousness of guilt. The defendant's surrender to law enforcement was likewise not to flight the charges and show that he has nothing to hide, but was taken with the precise goal of crafting an argument for bail before the court. However, while the defendant may have made a calculated decision in consulting with his attorneys to return to the Los Angeles after his relatively brief flight from his arrest on the complaint, that calculus inevitably changes today after a 43-count indictment was returned with extremely serious offenses carrying enormous potential penalties. So they saying before he was turning himself in, he didn't know the gravity of all his crimes that he was charged with. He just knew that they was looking for him and they wanted him. So they saying basically he came and turned himself in, but don't look just because he came and turned himself in and he didn't flee from justice for so long and he turned himself in. You have to look at this. This is why he turned himself in. But look, you know what I'm saying? This is why they're trying to show this is another reason for why they shouldn't let him out. It's crazy. He is now, for the first time in decades, facing a very likely prospect of never leaving prison alive, bro. This is what I'm saying. Indeed, that would be the guideline sentence on the charges that the government is prepared to prove by. Among other things, the testimony of witnesses and victims and electronic evidence, including intercepted phone calls and surreptitious recordings, man. Every day they getting you on recordings. Every day. You just confirming. This is what they're saying. This is what this means, bro. Given the serious nature of the charges, the strength of the evidence, and the defendant's access to vast amounts of resources and criminal support, his risk of non-appearance is more pronounced today than it ever has been. That's what they're saying now. They're saying before, when he turned himself in before, he'd have probably fled longer if that was the case. If he really knew what this 43 count thing was coming down on him, he might not want to, he might be likely to fly and to flee than to really come in deal with the bond conditions or the bail conditions. You know what I mean? So the nature and the seriousness of the dangers posed by the defendant's release. Okay, the defendant is not only a risk of danger to the community, but has acted on his dangerousness time and time again. And while this brief summarizes many of the defendant's violent acts, it may be missing others, given the defendant's use of others to commit crimes for him and his proclivity for talking in person or an encrypted application to avoid detection, and still the defendant's varied crimes are still omnipresent in his recorded communications. Further, the defendant's release would pose a serious risk to the individuals who have assisted the government in this case, as well as the witnesses and victims who have so far refused to cooperate or provide statements because of what they know. As to defendant made clear in an intercepted call on January 5th, 2023, being a rat means that you're done. Indeed, trying to intimidate and dissuade anyone from cooperating with law enforcement or otherwise reporting information about the defendant before turning himself in, the defendant posted on Instagram video naming his co-defendants and known opponents, instructing the public not to associate with them and claiming that if they did, they were not black. This tracks with the means and methods of the enterprise described in the indictment, threatening or pressuring victims or witnesses of crimes committed by members or associates of the Big U enterprise to avoid interaction with or to provide untruthful statements or testimony to law enforcement officers. Defendant release would pose a serious risk of the safety of those specific individuals. Now, threats of physical harm to cooperating witnesses risk serious danger to the witnesses themselves, as well as the community more broadly. To be plain, such conduct fundamentally endangers the integrity of the judicial process. Upholding the detention on danger finding based on the defendant's own threats of violence, including threats to potential witnesses or cooperators. Even nonviolent threats to judicial process, which defendants also engaged in, may warrant detention. So in this one, it was probably a non-violent threats was going on in this, explaining that the detention may be even justified in cases where violations related to the trial process, such as witness tampering, than in the cases where the defendant past criminality was said to support a finding of general dangerousness and rejecting contention, and that her attempts to influence the testimony of a witness, or witnesses, we should say, does not constitute the type of danger to the community that would support detention. So they're going to another case. No bail resource could mitigate the defendant's danger to the community in light of the severity of his charged offenses and obstruction during investigation following the announcement of the charges. They go into another case. Congress finding the defendant a danger community, posted substantial money bond. Okay, likewise, any proposed release bill conditions, including the electronic monitoring, would all suffer from a critical flaw in that they depend on the defendant's good faith compliance. Yeah, they say all of these things depend on good faith compliance, that you're going to just turn yourself in, or you're going to come back on bail or come back to your court dates. They're just saying that you got to do it on good faith. Like a monitor is not going to help you to do that. This, and this, and that. All of these things are not going to help you do that, bro. If you want to flee, you're going to flee. If you don't want to come back to court, you're not. If you don't want to have a warrant, you're going to. So that's basically what they're saying. They say they have things, but you got to have some good faith on it. In order to be effective, the citation omitted in particular, electronic monitoring does not prevent a defendant from committing crimes within the monitoring radius as well. And there is no reasonable way to assure that the defendant would not make impermissible stops on detours on his way to places. Like if you say, yo, listen, you tell your people, listen, man, I'm just going over here to my aunt's house. Chill, I'm just going there. But you going to your aunt's house, you going on the way where you going. So they could probably see where the shit been on your foot. You going on the right track. So you're not like you going some other way. But on your way, you book a nigga. You rob a nigga. You know what I'm saying? So they saying regardless of the fact, that don't stop people from committing crimes while on it. You know what I'm saying? While on the electronic monitoring things as well. Key factors to determine his fitness for bail. Serial flagrant criminality counsels against the bill in this case. In particular, given the defendant's history of engaging in obstructive conduct, no condition on the bond form could prevent and detect such conduct. A case in which Ferranti, a case in which the defendant was charged with witness tampering among other crimes and where obstruction remained an ongoing concern, the circuit court reversed the district court's release of the defendant on bond bail conditions because the $1 million bond, which was to be secured by properties owned by the defendant and his family, only deterred non-appearance, not danger. So that means that you would come in, because you got your multi-million-dollar house that your family's putting up. So you might not want to run away from this, scorn from bail, and then we come foreclosing your crib over here. You know what I'm saying? Take the cribs. Huh? What do you think is going on? So they say you might still come back to court, but now that don't mean that you aren't going to be committing crimes and doing stuff like that, which is, I can understand. More specifically, the appellate court found that the district court's bail condition intended to address witness tampering, which was a general prohibition of that the defendant was not to commit a crime or intimidate a witness, does not at all impede his ability to do so, and requires no more of him than that which the law already demands of a defendant and every other citizen. So even participation in pretrial services computer monitoring program would be insufficient to ensure that the defendant will cease in engaging in unauthorized and inappropriate communications in persons on undisclosed devices or through third parties. Indeed, the defendant floated BOP rules for years, and the defendant previously bragged about paying guards and overseeing the entire drug trade on the yard when previously serving time. More recently, as overheard on an intercepted call on November 22nd, 2022, when the defendant told an incarcerated individual that the defendant was going to charge someone in federal prison $6,000 to have a phone smuggled to him. Then on January 3rd, 2023, on an intercepted call, defendant told an incarcerated individual that the defendant was going to purchase 6 miniature phones to send to incarcerated individuals so that he could sell them in prison for $1,000 each. Now in custody himself, the defendant has asked his family to contact known victims in this case if the defendant cannot abide by the rules in a highly restrictive setting of detention. There is no reason that he should be trusted to abide by the court's condition in a less restrictive setting. The risk is too numerous to the victims and the witnesses in the case, as well as the rest of the public, is too great to give the defendant that chance. In conclusion, if the court wants to know how the defendant will conduct himself on pretrial release, it need look no further than the recordings documenting the defendant's conduct and threats throughout this investigation. With everything to lose, including the immense goodwill he fraudulently procured from the community and his city, defendants still told anyone who dared to ask that he was a clipper, and he proved that he was. Because the defendant is both a danger to the community and a risk of non-appearance, should the case not go his way, this court should permanently detain defendant pending trial. Crazy. It's crazy, bro. Crazy, bro. Oh, shit, my bad. My bad, y'all, my bad. Yeah, man, tell me what y'all thinking about this, man. So shit is crazy, bro. Nasty work. Nasty work. We got through it, though. We got through it. How long? I hope I got in like an hour. Oh, yeah, I got in 50-something minutes. Cool. Beautiful. Salute to that, right? Gang, gang, gang. Salute to that. Yeah, I got it out. Yes. I'm happy about that. Let me see something. Salute to everybody in the building, man. You already know the vibes. Make sure everybody's dropping a like. Everybody subscribing to the channel. Everybody turn the notification bells on. Make sure you notify when we dropping new content. You already know, man. It's crazy right now, man. DEA running to the crib. It's a lot. You already know the vibes. This is Pray off my upcoming album. We just gonna rock out. Everybody subscribe to the channel. Everybody hit notifications. After this live ends, I will be back with another live. Wack 100, Luce Cannon, and a bunch of these other people. 1200, Eddie Boy, talking about Luce Cannon father. We got a lot going on. Shout out to all the real people in the chat, all the real rights. You know I love y'all. It's a dirty game, especially when you surfing cane. And these niggas be informing. Fucking cowards talking to the law, man. Something in their grill like it's 4 man. Cause it's a dirty game, especially when you surfing cane. Yeah.